Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to Flat Earth United. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and joining me this evening is Zachary Zabala, otherwise known as YouTuber Good Times for All. How you doing, Zachary? How you doing?
Oh, wonderful, Nathan. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you very much. This is a cold conversation for you and I, because we've never ever chatted about this. So it's going to be an interesting one because there's no lead up to it and there's no preamble that we've had. So hopefully it'll be a really smooth conversation. We shall see.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it will.
So
I could talk about Psychopaths forever.
Well, me too. I mean, it's. I don't know how I got into Psychopaths now. It's such a long time ago since I looked at it, and there's probably people already in the chat saying, this is so 10 years ago. And it's like, well, probably yes, but there's going to be people out there undoubtedly that have not touched on this subject or have a limited understanding about the subject, and everybody's understanding of this 5% of the Western world should be better, in my opinion.
Yeah, or at least have some kind of awareness that there are as many out there as there actually are. Because not every psychopath wants to go out and kill people, or actually does. They may want to, but it takes a certain type of psychopath to be going that far.
Absolutely.
But I think here in the
blood's
US,
really expensive. I was going to say it's one of
200,000.
those old terms from the Godfather series that blood is expensive, and it's not just necessarily the actual the moolah, the cost involved. It's the time and the effort and the energy for your cold-hearted psychopath that they don't want to invest in that sort of behaviour. So very few of them are actually, the TV type portrayal of a psychopath, and that type of psychopath does exist, but they're very few and far between. Plus, the other misapprehension that most people have is that it's the Norman Bates type character, and he's a schizophrenic. He's not a psychopath at all.
Yeah, absolute, total opposite of the spectrum. Psychopaths, they're actually, there's a sociopath and then there's a psychopath. And both of them have, psychopaths, they say, don't feel empathy at all. They cannot put themselves in other people's shoes and think, wow, that has to hurt or that has to be, they just can't do that. They don't have that switch. Whereas they say people who are sociopaths, they can kind of put themselves in other people's position, but more or less they just don't care. A psychopath will study people and try to mimic them to be normal. They will want to seem normal to other people. And they say most psychopaths are highly intelligent. They're very good at hiding everything and mimicking and manipulating others, telling people what they want to hear. Whereas a sociopath will try to belittle people and put them down and almost try to get a sense of power over you. Whereas the psychopath, you're not going to notice it as much. It won't be as in your face. I think it's something like over 200,000 psychopaths are diagnosed every year.
Oh, what, using the what would it be, the DSM, actually a doctor in front of them?
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
the last
I
stats
read
I
that
saw.
number,
I
was
think
like,
it
wow.
was 5%, depending on what section of the society that you're actually looking at. But I think the percentage as a general average is between 4 and 5%, or maybe 1 in 20 people in the Western world. And as you leave the Western world, that goes down significantly.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
It's like
I'm not
in
sure
They
why
Live.
that is.
Do you remember? Do you ever see that movie, They Live? Because I've always interpreted They Live as a movie about psychopathy, and that little section of society getting worse and worse as you go up. Cream rises to the top, sort of thing. So a psychopath will have the same sort of route into society. They'll work their way up to the top. And you mentioned about perhaps being normal, and maybe their nefarious intent going under the radar being a bit more difficult to spot. But it's worse than that, because in my experience and through research, it seems that psychopaths are actually very amiable people. They're very, very likable, and because of exactly what you've described, so they don't the word you didn't use was empathy. They don't have any empathy, so they can't, as you put it, relate to how people are perceiving emotions or feeling things. They don't have that. It's beyond their comprehension. But what they can do is mirror, so they can take on the traits and personality. What's the word? The very essence of what somebody actually is in their personality is what a psychopath will pick up on and then try and reflect back to that person. So it's sometimes described as the mask of the psychopath, because you will encounter a psychopath and then find, oh, this guy's just like me, or this girl's just like me. They've got a lot in common with me and we seem to get on and talk about the same things. And 9 times out of 10, it's because they've actually done their research, unbeknownst to you.
Yeah, that's the scary part is they say their brain is like always it doesn't, I don't know, they don't have that not just the lack of empathy, but the lack of feeling almost any emotions. It's not just putting themselves in other shoes, it's even for themselves they don't feel empathy. It's so hard to try to relate to something like that.
Well, I've had a few examples given to me. So I interviewed Thomas Sheridan about 2 years ago. Really, really interesting guy who I followed for quite some time. And he gave an example. So he said that you've got 2 people standing on the street corner. One is a psychopath, one is not a psychopath. And a car crashes across from them. Now, the natural instinct of the guy who's not a psychopath is to run to the scene of the accident and see if he can help. Get slightly distressed, elevated heart rate, all of those normal things that everyone can picture. And there'll be a percentage of the audience that will have this happening right now as I describe this. You know, their hairs on the back of their neck might stand up, their heart rate might increase just from me detailing it. Now, a psychopath, the reaction's totally different. He will stay precisely where he is. He's not moving an inch. He will study the looks on the faces of the people who are crowding around and try and memorize some of those facial expressions to get a gauge of how to replicate them in future should he ever come across this situation again, or she. I don't want to make it seem like there's more male than female psychopaths, because it's definitely not the case. But yeah, so that was an example that Thomas Sheridan gave, which I thought was, yeah, that's exactly what they'd do. They'd sit, they'd study. They wouldn't raise their pulse in the slightest.
They actually say their heart rate actually will go down. They will become at more of a calm state when things like that happen. Now that was from some doctor, I forget who it was. And he said a certain percentage, it's a high percentage, but of psychopaths, the sight of blood and things like that, it doesn't just not bother them, but it actually puts them in a calmer state, that because other people are frantic. I don't know if it is so they can study better or this or that, but they tend to, it doesn't bother them. The blood and the gore and like I said, they have no empathy, even for themselves. I don't even know if they ever contemplate themselves dying. I don't know. That's why there's so many people that want to study psychopaths, especially the really, really wicked ones that they get joy from bringing others pain.
Well, this is the genuine depiction of the murdering psychopath, isn't it? So this is Ted Bundy. He's my go-to murdering psychopath.
Oh, everybody loved him. You know, he was
some of the people that knew him described him as the guy next door. Couldn't be nicer bloke, handsome, good-looking, charming. Charming is a word that you hear a lot with psychopaths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John Wayne Gacy. He was a pillar of his community. I mean, it's amazing because these people are so smart, but yet alone at the same time. They get caught by making the craziest, stupidest mistakes that you could think of, really. It's almost like they want to be caught, I think. Because none of them are stupid. That's like a prerequisite for being a psychopath, is you are highly intelligent. Especially if you get to be at an adult age, 30-something plus, and have not been diagnosed and nobody knows you, you are very well versed at your trade, you know, your craft or whatever you're doing. If you haven't been found out by that time, you're going to have to do something pretty drastic to get caught. And they're out there. That's the craziest part about it, is everybody in the audience probably knows a psychopath. And it, like we said, it's not somebody that goes around killing people or this and that. Um, and they're very good at hiding. But yeah, like you said, 1 out of 20 people.
Well, the
And
mask
every
is where they're hiding. So they're hiding behind an imitation of the person they're talking to. So every psychopath's going to interact differently with different people, and it depends on how much narcissistic supply they can get out of that individual. So your average passing Joe in the street isn't going to be very useful to them in terms of this is my segue into negative or positive narcissistic supply. If I could get my tongue around it. So it's not necessarily the case, in my opinion, that they want to get caught, as you phrase it. It's more the case that the default position is to lie about everything, because they can pile more lies on it and see the reactions. And most people are trusting. Most people trust what people tell them and don't naturally assume that every word out of somebody's mouth could potentially be blatant, outright lies. Especially when those blatant, outright lies are about yourself. In other words, they're mirroring your actions back to you. So for me, just pick something benign. I'm a hi-fi enthusiast. So you get chatting to somebody and suddenly you find out that they're into hi-fi and have had a nice hi-fi, and you get chatting about it. So you're not suddenly thinking, I need to put my guard up here. This person could be pack of lies, total nonsense, never seen a hi-fi in his life. You don't think that. You just naturally think, this person relates to me. And you get the positive flow of chemicals. The endorphins start flowing, essentially being love bombed, which I'm sure people have heard that phrase before, but may not necessarily know the context of it. But essentially, when you have that interaction with potentially a psychopath, or anybody for that matter, if you have a common ground, something to relate to the person with, you do naturally fill your brain with, is it epinephrine, I think is the one, and there's a whole bunch of them. I used to know all these about a couple of years ago, but a whole bunch of dopamine and endorphins that go into your brain that make you feel very, very good about yourself, especially if you found common ground with somebody. And they play on that, and you will, as a natural thing, want that again. In other words, you will want to reinforce that feeling of love. That's why it's called love bombing. It's not necessarily male or female. We're talking just people, man to man, woman to woman, man to woman, etc., etc. It's just that feeling of connection will be what they play on when they are mirroring your actions and kind of basically becoming you in a nutshell.
I've heard this one lady didn't know she was diagnosed as a psychopath. And she was probably I think late 20s, somewhere right around there. And it all happened because she walked onto an elevator and a gentleman said, "Hello, ma'am, how are you today?" And her normal response to someone she didn't know or anything like that was just to ignore them. I think she lived in a big city, so it's not uncommon. And as he was walking out, he got off at a floor that she wasn't getting off on. He said, "You might want to be checked out to see if you may be a psychopath." And said it real nice and polite, and then just walked on his way. And it kept ringing in her head, so she went and got checked out and whatnot. And sure enough, she was diagnosed as being a psychopath.
That's
Just
interesting.
because, yeah, it has to do with their ability to just ignore others as well. I'm not saying everybody that can do that is a psychopath, because I know in big cities it's just very common. But if there's just, two people standing in a small elevator, it's just polite to say, "Oh, I'm having a nice day. Thank you. Hope you're having a nice day," or something like that. Especially, and he was an elderly man, and the elderly are all about talking. I don't know how it is over there, but over here, if you say hello to an elderly person, especially out here in the country, you could have a half-hour conversation with them after that. They'll just sit and talk to you for as long as you want to talk, really. But I noticed the younger people, it's not like that so much. It's like they're breeding that out of us almost. I don't know if it's TV or what. I don't doubt it that they're trying to make more psychopaths, or that they have a recipe to create a psychopath. Not one that works all the time, but I think it was a Jesuit priest who said, "Give me the first 7 years of a child's life, and I'll give you a lifelong slave."
Yeah, I don't think you can nurture a psychopath, though. Again, this is only after chatting with Thomas Sheridan and watching a lot of his stuff. You know, he gave me the impression, I asked him the question similar to kind of how you've just phrased the nature question versus nature versus nature versus nurture question, and he kind of said no, that they'd be displaying signs of it from birth. What I found interesting about your woman's concern was, again, something that Thomas Sheridan said, which was to say, if you were ever concerned that you might be a psychopath, that would be a display of empathy. Therefore, there's a good chance you're not. So it might just be the trigger of the conversation as opposed to that feeling of empathy for her. But it just thought, that's an interesting example of somebody that did actually turn out after going through the DSM tests. And finding out that person, did you say it was a girl?
Yeah, female.
Yeah, finding
Late
out she was a
20s,
psychopath.
Yeah, well, they say it's a lot more common than we think. I mean, 200,000 a year that just blew my mind when I saw that number. I couldn't believe that. Because I was thinking, Norman Bates, Ted Bundy, that was your psychopath. Until I started really looking into it, I was like, wow, there's not much difference between a psychopath and a normal person, except for the empathy part, the lack of emotion and feeling for anything.
Right.
And it's even, I mean, animals, these people, they don't have pets. They don't, or if they do, it's to appear to be normal.
Yes.
It's not out of love. It's not out of, I don't know, it's hard to imagine. It is.
No, you're
I think there's
exactly
a
right.
spectrum.
Same goes for children. So the psychopath will often try and normalise their existence with a wife and kids, so that they appear normal. Also because they've got total and ultimate control over the woman that they've married, or man that they've married in the case of a woman. But yeah, so
they
they'll try
wouldn't
and
get married. Yeah, if they didn't have total control, there would be no marriage. They'd find somebody that they could.
Right. So how did you come across all this information then? Did you just all read it in books, watch it on YouTube videos, read it on the net?
Yeah, just pretty much I did a little, well, I was looking into secret societies and stuff like that, and it kind of came across while I was doing that. The whole Illuminati families and stuff like that, and the big secret society families where the children are born into the secret societies. They almost as if they don't have a choice. And some of the stories that I had heard, that's where I got the whole trying to breed a psychopath. Like I said, it wouldn't take always. It's not like baking a cake. But I think they have a good way of trying to turn down at least the emotion, the empathy scale. Some people, they can watch a commercial on TV and start crying. Where then you get to the psychopath level, which is at the other end of the spectrum, and you could stab a little puppy in front of, or kill a family member of theirs, and they wouldn't shed a tear, wouldn't even really react. It's that big of a spectrum, and I think there's people all along both sides. It's not like you're either a psychopath or you're Don Juan, the greatest lover ever. There's people right in the middle. I think the sociopaths are just a little bit to the psychopath side, because they say they still can feel, but they're very good at ignoring it, that little voice, the conscious, whereas a psychopath doesn't have a conscious. There is no little voice in their head telling them that it's wrong.
Again, I'll have to be just told off in the comments if I get this terminology wrong, but I think it's that their base instincts, their predatory instincts, God, tongue twisters, a lot of these words, their predatory instincts come from the pineal gland. In other words, this is fight or flight responses at a base level that they're operating in. So that's why perhaps when you say that they're actually becoming more calm when they see things unfolding or being considered distressful to others, they may actually become more calm in those circumstances, because it is a opportunity. So you need to remain calm if you're in a predatory mode. I don't know, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but it's just, again, interesting that you've got a very different take on it to me, especially as you've looked into actually nurturing psychopaths into existence, presumably through, childhood manipulation. But, like I say, when it was Thomas Sheridan explaining it, he was saying that the certain types of characteristics you could see from birth, pretty much. I think he went into a detailed explanation about breastfeeding and various different attributes of small children that are actually psychopathic from birth, frighteningly enough. But in terms of the scale, when you describe that scale, yes, I think you're talking just for 100% of people. There's some people who sit higher on the narcissistic scale than others, and other people sit higher on the empathic scale than others. But ultimately speaking, as you say, the people we are describing are at the very top of this scale. They have absolutely no empathy whatsoever. So it's not like they slide into that mode, not at all. They're permanently there. But however, a guy I've been watching, not so much recently, but certainly in the last year, a guy called Knowing the Narcissist, who, again, who's the other guy that's similar? Sam Vaknin is a self-confessed psychopath. He makes videos about psychopaths, as is the guy I've forgotten his name now, but the guy who runs the channel called Knowing the Narcissist. And he categorises it slightly differently in the regards that there are definite degrees of intelligence scale and even self-awareness of psychopathy at the very highest level. So he would class himself as, of course, the elite highest of psychopaths with the best of quality of brain. Yeah. But yes, Tudor, his name is H.G. Tudor. So not that I'm saying he isn't or anything along those lines, but nonetheless, he says he's a self-aware psychopath, top of the range psychopath. But bottom of the range would be your average sort of scumbag, parasite, thief, just swindler, con artist, the type of scumbag that's beating his wife to keep control of her, that sort of thing. That guy's definitely not self-aware, definitely not a smart psychopath. Whereas as you go up those range, he would have lower psychopath, lower mid, lower high, and then you go into the mid-range psychopaths that are, again, not aware but can run a slightly longer con, or work their way into a marriage to bleed a woman dry and things like that. Just a bit more smart, and then you go up and up and up in terms of the scale and how good they are. And obviously at the top of the pile you've got the people that end up in government, and because they are genuinely smart as well as being ruthless and psychopathic.
Have you ever seen the now, I'm not saying Barack Obama is a psychopath, but after Barry got out of college, he went and followed, I forget the guy's name. He's a doctor. But you hear the man speak at a speech, a couple years before Obama stepped into office and became, he was a senator. Anyway, he emulated this man's speech pattern, the way he talked, everything, to a T. You could tell where he's learned his mannerisms and his overall tone. Because Barry didn't always speak like that. I mean, he wasn't, I'm calling him Barry because that's his real name. A lot of people don't know that, Barry Soetoro. But yeah, he was one of the people, after I learned about Psychopath, I was watching that video and I was like, wow, this is crazy. He saw that guy and he wanted to be just like him. And it's scary how much of a change it went from before to after. Even the way he was, the way he spoke on a lot of his college term papers and stuff like that, about being a self-aware black man, this and that, yada, 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 fighting the system and the evil white man and this and that and yada, 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 to where he became a politician, and all that kind of speak went away, which you almost have to be a politician. But it was just, it's scary, the transformation.
Oh, no, I know exactly what you're saying. Again, I can't remember I can't credit who said this particular instance, but let's say that and I can test this myself actually. So you'd see a picture of somebody that you knew or had interactions with, obviously we're talking psychopathy here, so a psychopath, and potentially you could see them a few years later after if you have been discarded by that psychopath, you cross paths with them and they look, or you see a photograph of them or whatever, something along those lines, and they can look like a completely different person. They can sound like a completely different person, and you can almost not recognise them as the individual that you once knew. And the reality is because they're not. You know, what they were when you knew them was yourself being mirrored back to you. And that's what your experience with that person was. So when you describe Barack Obama mirroring a trait that is useful for him in his position or gaining that position, that makes total sense, you know. And I'm not afraid to say that I'm sure 99% of politicians are psychopaths. So, you know, it's not a stretch to say that.
Yeah, they say, oh, what was I going to say? It just escaped when you said that.
That's okay. I could move on to a slightly different topic, which is the area of triangulation, which is to say that if you use an example of somebody who's in a marriage potentially, so they're tied to the person in a very permanent way, and they are no longer useful to the psychopath, so they're about to be discarded, just to set the scene. So you're about to see the back of the psychopath, but before that happens, the person will start to communicate with all of the spouse's friends, their family. They'll start to portray that person as the psychopath, how they're a monster, but unbeknownst to the spouse, who is at this point undoubtedly in one breath doting on them but simultaneously hating their guts, you know what I mean, but dedicated to the cause because they're undoubtedly very empathetic, without going into back details and backstories about these imaginary people that I'm describing. So that is the point where the psychopath will triangulate with all of the people that they are about to discard, about to let loose, cut loose, however you want to phrase it. And at the point where that actually happens, the discard comes, they are cut out of their life, the person who's been discarded very abruptly has two things happen. Number one, they have a chemical crash, because up until that point they've been, as we described earlier, love bombed. So they're always looking for that next hit, right? Which will have long passed if the person's actually fully ensnared. But nonetheless, they're still looking for that hit that they can't quite achieve. Then they're cut off completely. And of course, the natural instinct will be to reach out to friends, family, whatever, who have already been triangulated. They've already had the poison poured down their ear and portrayed as potentially nuts, you know, portrayed as a monster by the psychopath themselves, so that the person can have no support as they get discarded. So, I don't know, is triangulation something that you've looked into particularly, Zach, or is this a fairly new
Yeah, but not so much on that aspect. It's more has to do with the psychopaths, how they would interact with people at their jobs. I read an article on that, what to look for. And a psychopath will tell, you know, they're good about it. They're smart. A sociopath will tell lies to two people, different lies that talk to each other. You know, that's why sociopaths will usually get figured out as being liars and this and that. Where psychopaths, they're very good at keeping their lies straight, but they tend to, if they do tell a different lie, it'll be to people that they know don't like each other. Stuff like that. And then they'll get them to other people to start lying about each other. Stuff like that. They're very good at manipulating more than one person at a time. They'll manipulate multiple people to get their way, to get a higher position at work, to get somebody fired, to get, you know, a certain thing that they want at work to happen. They're very good at setting up a plan and actually carrying it out and doing it. It's really interesting.
When you talk about work, it immediately makes me think of that next level subject in terms of triangulation, which is the smear campaign itself. So is this something you've either had experience with or maybe, you know, looked into, shall we say?
Oh, yeah. I never thought that the people were psychopaths, but some of them were probably smart enough to be. But yeah, the smear campaign, I haven't had it so much done to me. Definitely not by a psychopath, by stupid people that were under me that didn't like me telling them to do their job and stuff. I've had that, but no, I've never had it to where actually I don't know really. You never know if a psychopath has ever played a game on you because most of them aren't found out. But they're yeah, they're very good at getting their way. Like you said, 99% of politicians are probably psychopaths.
I
They're
think
like the cream of the crop psychopaths.
I think it depends on
Then
your
you,
level of interaction. So, again, this is a H.G. Tudor term, or knowing the narcissist YouTuber. It's about how useful you are. So he describes the empaths, the people that the psychopaths are using, as appliances, and appliances have got uses, and when they're useful, great, you have to keep on top of them and service them. But when they become unuseful or troublesome, then you discard that appliance and replace it with a new appliance. And you might have other appliances that you're trying at the time, if you're a psychopath. But that is ultimately the point of it. You've got a certain degree of usefulness, and it's normally down to how empathic. That's the right word, yeah. How empathic you are. So the useful people to psychopaths are the ones that will dote on them and buy them gifts and keep them, give them money. The people that they can basically con and cheat with initially a huge dose of love bombing, followed by a slow trickle down in love bombing to a point where the person is just, at a very low chemical state, looking for that occasional whatever it is that psychopath does just to keep the person in check, keep them sweet, so to speak. So yeah, it depends on your level of usefulness. If you're not in the slightest bit empathic, then you're probably not that useful to a psychopath. That's the reality of it.
and the real good psychopaths, they can even be mean. Like you said, the guy will go home and beat his wife, but she would never leave him, and it's not out of fear. Is this the craziest part? It's because she's looking for that love that she got at that one time. Oh, I know he's in there somewhere, yada yada yada, or she's in there somewhere. Um, yeah, it's like you said, they give him that love bombing, and and then it turns into, at first it's, oh, I could never live without you, all this kind of stuff. And eventually it turns into, what would you ever be without me? That's when they're getting ready to discard you, they'll start saying stuff like that. Or to try to keep you around, just as the people who have double families, triple families, families in different cities and whatnot, stuff like that, I would almost guarantee all of them are psychopaths.
Oh, definitely, and there's a good chance that the actual people concerned, don't even realise that they've got other families. So, there's going to be no clue, exactly, because it's kept very much separate. Different worlds, different families, different masks. So why would you know it's a different mask that psychopath's got on that day? Until you find out, and then the world crashes around you, and then you get discarded. Good chance. But yeah.
Yeah. Both families probably. They just pick up and leave and go try to pretend like they're normal somewhere else. Yeah, it's a topic that really they haven't scratched the surface. I think because so many of the people in the higher positions are psychopaths. It isn't something that they want, the common person to even be thinking about.
No, definitely not. Well, they've tried to lie about it in the media, as I say, straight away with Norman Bates. You're misled to the impression that they're all murderers. But there's a grain or a shred of truth in that, as we've described with people like Ted Bundy, who definitely was a psychopath. But on the whole, you're talking more like Tony Blair, politicians. Now, those are the type of people who are making the rules, and they don't want to be known as anything like a psychopath. It's better that they're under the radar, so it's better that we are misled in terms of what we believe these people are. Because if we actually knew that they're the people with the big grin and the endearing smile and the generous nature when you first encounter them, then people would be much more likely to be putting up a decent defence if they ever encounter these people, or know what steps can be taken. should they actually be entangled with the psychopath? But most people don't. You know, they've got a vague idea because they might have watched the odd YouTube video about it. But, you know, with me, it was definitely through personal experience with a psychopath that I got interested in the subject. It's all flooding back now, of course. But yeah, you get to know the traits as you discover them based on, or at least for me, the person that I knew. And you could say, yes, that's definitely a characteristic that I recognise. Yes, that's definitely a trait that I recognise, as you start to see the various different things that you've remembered being read back to you or on the page as you're reading it, to associate that experience with what actually happened. Because most people who have actually experienced something like a discard, they have no clue why it's happening or what is happening. So they'll be left in a sort of a very much a state of distress. So at that point, you don't know what to do. And normally, most people will make all of the wrong moves. They'll make all of the mistakes should they ever find themselves encountered with them. So, I mean, maybe that's the next place I should take this, which is there may be people watching this that go, psychopaths in the title. I suspect I'm dealing with a psychopath at the moment. It doesn't matter if it's a girlfriend, boyfriend, boss, whoever. But they might think, well, what do I do? Well, you've actually only got one solution. There's literally only one solution to dealing with psychopaths, believe it or not. And it's the age-old adage of no contact ever again. Now, I'm sure you've heard that phrase before.
Yeah, that's the only... There are some doctors that say that there's not a cure, but they can move out of this. And they're probably either psychopaths themselves or have somebody very close to them that is a psychopath that they believe came out of it, out of being naive, really. I don't think you can teach empathy. It's not something, I mean, that's the main basis of all of this is you have to be able to feel for other people, to be able to put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, you know, I'm not going to go over there and, you know, hurt this person either emotionally, physically, however, because I wouldn't want that done to me. You know, they can't do that. They don't, that doesn't even cross their mind.
And not at all. They do not care. They, you know, I have to swear to do this, but they do not give a fuck. That's the only way to put it.
Yeah, they don't. They don't know how. It's that little thing inside of most of us that tells you, hey, don't do that again. You know, that was wrong. We all learn, you know, through our lives, hey, when I do something mean to somebody, that made them cry. I don't want to see them cry anymore because I don't want to hurt them. That step one never even comes into their head. Their step one is, why is that person crying? How could I emulate that when I want something to go my way? Or how are other people reacting to them crying? Those are the things that go through their head. It's
absolutely spot on. Yes, indeed.
Scary.
Terrifying
really
when you think about it.
Yeah.
But yes.
Like you said, there's only one thing you can do, and that is cut off all contact with that person. I don't think there's helping them. I hate saying stuff like that. I try to be as positive as possible, but I don't really want to get on that subject, but it's the same thing with pedophiles. There is something in them that is different. It may have been, you know, from something that happened to them, this and that. That's why, I don't know.
Sure. Pedophiles, a whole different subject. But what you mean, though, is we're talking about monsters, and I do get the association because we're dealing with people that are cognitively very different to ourselves. And, you know, psychopaths, paedophiles, these are, you know, spectrums that we personally cannot relate to even if we try because they're wired differently. You know, and in the case of psychopaths, wired in such a way that no matter how much you try and relate to them, they will still not care. So it's one where at this point I think it's probably a good idea because of the type of audience we've got watching is relating it back to a subject that I know you and I have talked about in the past in great detail, which is flat earth. Now, if I loosely segue that out into a more general topic of deception, it kind of makes more sense to people when they understand the type of people that are deceiving them and why. So if you have the situation where you as a rational individual want to explain an action that you have taken, or you have remorse, or you think over something that you may have done well or badly, this is again something that is only considered for the benefit of the psychopath. In other words, it's not necessarily about the person that they may hurt, it's always about them and what they can achieve. Therefore, the lies that we experience in some instances make no sense, literally no sense. But when you as a normal person try and rationalise why would they tell such a lie, and the answer is psychopaths. It's because we're dealing with that type of person.
Yeah, you can't. I don't think a normal person, somebody that has, a non-sociopath, at least is on the empathy scale of going towards, a lot of love, a lot of caring. You can't even put your mind into their mindset. It's impossible. I've tried plenty of times. And it always comes back to, well, how could they do that? That's always the question that pops into my head is, how could they not care? And I don't think somebody with empathy, you're never going to understand these people. Like you said, they're wired differently. Their positive and negative are different than ours. Or maybe they don't have a positive. Maybe it's just all negative.
Well, that's an interesting one because, again, back to Thomas Sheridan, he said that in terms of how they're wired, some could argue that they're wired better than we are. They're more efficient, they're more focused. So one could argue that they are, I don't even use this word, but I've got no other thing that I can use in this place, but they have evolved to be better in that respect because they are functioning more efficiently than we are. It's at the detriment of everybody else, but ultimately speaking, that is still true, regardless.
I wouldn't call them evolved, though. I would say that they are less evolved. They are more using their fight or flight animal instincts all the time.
Whereas, yeah, definitely. Primeval. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
From a functioning point of view, they are functioning on a lower level as opposed to a higher level. I completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, they may be more intelligent, but as far as, doing better for even themselves, psychopaths do not do good for themselves. They don't. They think they are, but they have no idea of what real even is, like what is really important, because they don't have the emotions. There are poor people all over the earth that are so much happier than the richest people. Now, in all reality, if you got to pick a life from somewhere else and say, I would like to be happy my whole life and, have a family that loved me and that I loved and this and that and go through all these different emotions, or I would want to be somebody cold and calculated that cared about nothing but made $1 billion but spent it all alone and sad, or not even sad, just spent it alone and empty, I guarantee it would be probably 95% of the beings would want to pick to be happy and poor.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've made that choice quite some time ago. I mean, this is slight aside, but being time rich and money poor is far, far better than being money rich and time poor. And I've definitely been in both positions. At the moment, I'm definitely money poor and time rich, but I'm a far happier person for that. And like you say, would you rather be ruthless and calculated at the detriment of absolutely everyone around you, ruthless and self-serving, but ultimately take no joy out of life because you are incapable of it? Well, I say incapable, that was going to be the next thing I came on to, actually, which was somebody who's got a parallel on this, which I hope he watches this video, actually, because I'm a big fan, but Russian Vids often talks about psychopaths and their nefarious ways, what they're doing and how they function. And obviously that's what we're talking about today. But it does make a lot of sense when you know what, again, what duping is and what duper's delight is, which is something that the lies that are associated with psychopaths go hand in hand with duping and duper's delight, that wry smile that someone gets at the corner of their mouth that they can't but help when they've got one over on somebody. And that's ultimately what a lot of the lies and deception we have in, I think, the current setting we find ourselves as flat earthers. We're in a very conspiratorial realm where people are some of them are bonkers, but some of them are pointing out genuine discrepancies in things that we see in the mainstream media, in the way that we're governed, all of these things. And, some are more aware than others. But ultimately speaking, someone like Russian Vids is pointing out that it's just a joke to a lot of the people who are putting this stuff out there. They are literally duping us for their own amusement.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm wondering why the flat Earth has been put out the way it has. So, I mean, they could make it so it would never show up on a recommended video right off the get-go. They could have done that. And I still have something in the back of my mind saying, what is their game plan here? Why did they release this? The only thing I can think of is they're taking stock of all the people that are awake. That's the only thing I can see out of it, is that they want to know who's aware of what they're doing and who's open-minded enough to even accept reality.
That kind of implies that they care. I think if it's been put out intentionally at all, it would be for the same reasons it was put out in the 70s, and I don't know when it was prior to that, probably in the 30s. But yeah, they put it out periodically so that it can be ridiculed. So initially, I certainly felt 3 years ago like we were in a very tiny corner of the internet and we were only there to be ridiculed. So people remembered, you must ridicule flat earthers. And anything goes, just go and call them idiots. It's perfectly fine and it'll feel good. Go and do it, globeheads. You'll enjoy it. So if anybody came across flat earth, they're cognitively wired to ridicule it from birth anyway. The notion is of Philistines, flat earth, what? No, not at all. You're an idiot. That's the natural reaction. So if you can filter it out in a certain amount of, in a controlled way, it means that people still get to have it reminded that it exists. Because if you just came across the notion totally cold, it might resonate just instantly because you'd never heard it before. You didn't know that it was supposed to be ridiculed. You didn't know that people were aware that it was flat before. So I think in that instance, they've got to drip it out. So that being the case, it might be the case that it's just gone out of control. In other words, too many people have spread the information, not been downtrodden by whoever's trying to, shut them up, which is everyone. Literally anybody who's in the Western world doesn't want you to say it's flat. So, naturally it's not shills and agents that are doing it. It's just your guy next door. I mean, I've spent a couple of days with my brother-in-law and sister, and they're like everybody. They're just normal people. So they feel it necessary to ridicule me every now and again. Just a reminder, you're a flat earther and I'm not. But so, every person that's going to be doing this is going to want to suppress it. But in this instance, it seems like it has actually caught hold, and more and more people are finding out. Therefore, the mainstream media are going to naturally want to cover it. And while you can keep a fairly tight control over the media, there is a certain amount of independence to people, and the media is run by people, so it's going to, seep out into the public domain, which is exactly what it's done. So I think that's the only way I could see it. More likely, because it's a psychopath subject, I think that more likely is that it's like any psychopathic lie. Any lie is built on an initial lie, and then that web just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's destined for self-destruction. Eventually it will collapse under its own weight. And let's just think of an example of this, something that they've layered on top. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I'm thinking of the heliocentric smear of bullshit that they lay on top of stuff when something is debunked. They come along with another explanation for it. Maybe, LIGO versus Cavendish or something along those lines. They come out with a new piece of bullshit to reinforce the heliocentric model and prop it back up again where it's failed. So, again, that's back to put it out into the public so that people can come up with those debunkings, and we can then, put the wheels in motion to spread the bullshit a little bit thicker. But like I say, when you get to a certain thickness of bullshit, it just collapses in on itself. So that could also be the reason. I think it's a psychopathic lie to begin with, and it's a psychopathic system that holds up the heliocentric lie, and that's starting to collapse under its own weight, because too many lies have been spun. It's getting farcical. Some of the things, especially NASA, space in general, it's ludicrous and farcical if you look at it with the slightest degree of critical thinking. So in other words, if you've come across flat Earth, you then go and look at NASA with a very different, a different cognition and go, my God, it's all lies. So from that perspective, I think they haven't been trying hard enough. The web of lies has got too big, and that predominantly boils down to a lot of dupers getting dupers' delight out of weaving the most farcical of lies in some of the things that they put into people's heads about the where we live. We don't live on a spinning ball. That, when you think about it now as a flat earther, is quite literally preposterous and laughable, but that's the lie we've been told, and the nonsense that goes along with it gets more and more ridiculous and double speaky, if that's a term. But let's think of another example. Coriolis, just a perfect example of double speak that doesn't work in their favour, and everyone punts as being a great proof of a globe. It's the kind of nonsense that gets them in trouble in the end, and I think that's what we're experiencing. We're experiencing the end of a long, long list of lies that have got more and more ridiculous to the point where they won't be accepted anymore, and that's where I think we're at, as opposed to as opposed to why is it being put out. I think it's just the case that the lies have come to their end. Their natural progression has been reached. Maybe.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't think we're at the end quite yet. I see academia, it's going to take a little bit of time. The mob will be awake before the academics will, I think. And that's scary to me. You would hope it'd be the other way around, but the way I see academics anymore, it's people who can parrot and memorize very well, but there aren't that many critical thinkers anymore. And that's by design. They don't teach people to think critically anymore. You see and I'm sure everybody that's been on TV talking about, oh, well, Aristophanes figured this out over 2,000 years ago. Most of them are probably just reading a script, but I think a lot of these educated people actually believe this stuff. They can't even see the fact that, hey, if the sun were closer, it would do the same thing. That never even crosses their mind. Or if they hear it, they have the cognitive dissonance where that just rolls right off. And they say, no, it can't be. So I'm not even going to entertain that idea.
Well, when they look into it, they'll get caught up in doublespeak. But I mean, we're off the subject slightly of psychopaths now, but that's
yeah,
good.
We
that's
are.
Fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's fine. I mean, I was just thinking of an example off the top of my head, which was Sleeping Warrior and a chap that's a science teacher, and they got chatting. I think Anthony even did a test with him, a GCSE test, which is like the high school equivalency or whatever you would call it over there, the test that you get at the end of schooling, and having done it and passed, they then got to have a debate on flat Earth. Now, it was open. In other words, Anthony passed him all the questions, told him exactly what he was going to be finding out from him and the rebuttals. So he had everything that he needed. But when the show actually began, he didn't do what he was expected to do by Anthony, which was to stick to science, stick to what he's been taught, apply that methodology. Instead, he went to the pictures from space and, all the stuff that normal Joe Blogg's average would go to. And, it obviously took Anthony back because he was expecting something completely different. But literally, the people of science, in quotes, the people who are the educated amongst us, would absolutely take that cognitive route quicker than recognise that it defies their own education. And I think the doublespeak is the worst in education. You know, that is where the doublespeak gets to farcical levels. And the same thing applies. You know, education is power, and I think it attracts the same type of psychopathy. There's my segue, subtle. So you still end up with people in positions of power in the education system, and whether or not they recognise the deceit is irrelevant. They just recognise the power, and whether or not they can keep it is whether or not they will toe the line, keep the momentum of whatever it is that's being punted, because that's their job. And they can exercise power within that if they have control over whatever discipline that they are controlling. Excuse me. So I think psychopathy in education is no different to politics. You know, there's going to be psychopaths at the top of the chain in either. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, they they have no emotion, so it's, oh, I just had it too. They have no even, oh, you just said an emotion and it was perfect. I'm having another brain fart.
That's all right. I'll have the same brain fart with you at the same time. I don't know what word I used.
They oh, well, about teaching. What did you say about, oh, the lying, teaching lies and stuff like that, that doesn't bother them. They don't have the I'm not, oh, it was a good word too. Not morality or the moral compass or anything like that.
Oh, it's just power. It's always
They do
comes down
whatever they have to keep in power.
Yeah, exactly.
What,
So
they will tell
the
anybody
nonsense is
whatever they
irrelevant.
want to
In other
hear.
words, you know, if the book is wrong, but the book is what
Doesn't
they are
matter.
due to teach, then that doesn't matter in the slightest. You know, the
Yeah.
contradictions are irrelevant. It's more about the power
There
and
is
the
no
position that they hold.
nobility. There is no, they don't have those feelings. Even feelings of self-worth and things like that. Like you said, they're on an animal instinct level. It's, I need to eat just to eat, to survive. I need to keep my body temperature a certain way. And those are like the three main things they're actually, if they worry at all, those are the things they worry about. Everything else is like they're a computer almost. They don't have the feeling.
I'm going to make some
Like I said,
recommendations, I reckon.
most
So
people can't. Yeah, most people can't comprehend a psychopath. I don't think anybody that isn't a psychopath could comprehend a psychopath.
well, that's something I'm going to reiterate then. So if you ever have that question going through your head, I wonder if I am a psychopath, then you're not.
There you go. It wouldn't cross your mind. You wouldn't care.
No, you wouldn't care to care about asking that question in the first place. You just wouldn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Now, according to Israel, I'll make a few plugs for a few channels. So if people have been interested in the conversation, they can go elsewhere and get better information than I have. You've been really good, Zach. But I will make some recommendations to some channels. So the one I've mentioned a couple of times already, which is Knowing the Narcissist. So HG Tudor. So Knowing the Narcissist is his YouTube channel name, and he makes very frequent videos. They're about 10 minutes long-ish, normally just narration with a backdrop, but very, very informed about psychopathy, and a good listen, easy to listen to. The other one is Thomas Sheridan. Again, I've mentioned him a few times, but yeah, he doesn't necessarily do so much these days on psychopathy. It's what he's renowned for, but has moved on to other topics. But certainly some of the stuff from maybe about 5 to 10 years ago, he was top of his game in terms of psychopathy and the information he put out there. So definitely check out Thomas Sheridan. I'll put links to both Thomas Sheridan and HG Tudor in the info box below this video once it's rendered, so that you can have at least a dabble in some of these subjects. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. So yeah, was there anything you wanted to add in terms of psychopathy, Zach, that we haven't touched on maybe?
No, no, not really. We kind of covered all the bases. Just how people need to realize there are a lot more of them out there than, like you said, it's 1 in 20, 5%. So take a look at some of the people that you know, and I'm not saying study them or anything, but just kind of be aware when something's going awry, when things are going a little bit, try to keep your cool if you can. or if it's somebody else, and take a look around and see who's doing exactly what you're doing. Don't do it because you have no empathy, but just try it. Just take a look around and see who's really being calm and cool and collected. And 9 out of 10 times, I bet that person will be a psychopath.
And if that's the case, you want to run a mile from that person. It's the only way to win.
Yeah,
no contact.
Avoid them at all costs.
Yeah. Well, that's maybe the thing to round out on in that case, Zach. So, yeah, the only solution is no contact ever again, and what that actually means. So, if you, the easiest one is a boyfriend/girlfriend, depending on what you are. But yeah, if that person is needing removing from your life, you have to remove them, which is to say that you never, ever, ever contact them again. Now, contact, most people think that means proactively picking up the phone and calling them, which it doesn't. It means you don't look at their Facebook profile anymore. You don't try and find out what they're doing with their friends. You don't keep tabs on them. None of it. In other words, you completely cut them out of their life. And the place that most people go wrong is with the triangulation aspect of it. So if it was again, boyfriend, girlfriend situation, husband, wife, whatever, prior to the terrible situation that befalls the victim or the empathic person that's rejected by the psychopath, prior to that, they will have had all of their potential friends poisoned against them. So very quickly after the rejection, the discard, they would have to find out who is actually on their side. And if they're not on their side, i.e. they're on the side of the narcissist, the psychopath, then that person ultimately also has to be completely cut off, rejected, because they will only ever be a lead back in for that psychopath to triangulate them against you, which is, like I say, that's the place that most people go wrong. They think, well, I can still stay friends with my husband's tennis partner because obviously he's a good guy. Gerald would never do anything. No. Gerald's got to go. So that's probably the best place to round out. No contact.
If Gerald's still talking to the psychopath, then yeah, you can't have anything to do with Gerald either.
Precisely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm going to say a massive thank you to you, Zach. It's been a real pleasure chatting about this. Cold or otherwise, that was a really good conversation.
Yeah, I think so too, Nathan. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And on that note, I'll also say, first and foremost, a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the live audience for tuning in and hopefully sharing this debate. And, of course, a massive thank you once again to Zachary Zabala, otherwise known as YouTuber Good Times for All, for joining us in this discussion about psychopaths. If you hated the show, then you know exactly what to do. But if you like the show, maybe consider sharing it with a friend or subscribing if you've not done so already. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!